Welcome to the podcast, Bridging the Divide. This podcast is organized by the Women in Mathematical Science in Cyprus network. This social action is funded by the British Council and the grant is managed by Women on Top. My name is Margarita Zachariou. I'm the president of the network and also a researcher in applying mathematics in medicine and biology. And we're very happy to be here today with Mrs. Anna Koukkides Procopiou, who will help us unpack the discussion on how the gender gap can be bridged with data-driven policies. And this is a follow-up activity from the event we had back in June, where Anna was our keynote speaker. And for those of you, the few that don't know, I think, about Anna, she's the president of the Politia think tank. She's also the former minister of the Justice and Public Order Ministry. And she has lots of experience in many different things. So welcome, Anna. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the conference to begin with, and I would like to congratulate you on that. And also to say that it's a great thing that women in mathematical sciences have organized themselves in Cyprus with you as president, because the more women we have in institutional bodies, the more institutional champions we will have for women. Because, and I'm starting on this note because one of the problems that we face in Cyprus is that there are no institutional champions for women. And I will start with that by saying, for example, that we don't have any institutional champions in the Employers and Industrial Federation. There is no particular chapter or any particular drive to promote that. Just giving one example. Now we've started, for example, in the Shipping Association, in the Chamber of Commerce to have some institutional champions. But what about the Journalists Association? Are they institutional champions for what happens in the realm of the media that drives inequality? So with that as food for thought, I commend you on this effort to start the society in Cyprus and to organize this conference, which I think, again, was very important because one of the main issues we have when we talk about gender equality, and maybe many other things, but when we discuss gender equality in a professional concept or in an academic concept, a lot of the people who participate in the discussion, they will always say, but my experience is different. Oh, I never faced inequality. Oh, we have lots of women at the office. We have lots of students at the university, female students. I think you were there when we were doing some other work, and the professors at a particular university were so adamant that they have so many women around them that there could be no inequality. And then when we unpacked the data we had, then the point we were making was crystal clear. Because, for example, in the mathematical sciences or in STEM, you have lots of students who decide to study math, but not applied math. And they will not, as you move up the ladder in studies, moving from undergraduate to postgraduate to doctorate to postdoc, women become fewer and fewer. And if you take those numbers and you try to see how they reflect in the industry, many of those women just decide to teach math and not actually apply it and practice it and become member of the STEM sector of the economy, where most of the money is and where the least unemployment is faced. So in those two aspects, I just wanted to say, well done. And you have a very long way ahead of you. And we're looking forward to many more events, similar events by your society.
Thank you. And I have to say, you already touched upon various topics I was thinking on discussing today, especially this having institutional champions, because change can come by having these representatives in different sectors, right? And part of the activities that we do, I think, is raising awareness. And like you said, because we have this mathematical background, we want to bring the data to when you try to convince a stakeholder or a public policy, let's say, someone that is involved in this, you need evidence. You need something to convince them with. And the data need to be analyzed properly and presented properly for that. So this was kind of the idea of the event, bringing the researchers and the stakeholders together. And I think many of the things you have done also in the past, I was going to ask you about some relevant initiatives, were also oriented toward creating these champions in different areas, right? I'm thinking now, things like the Lean In initiative, for example, empowering women wherever they are to empower more women in underrepresented areas, for example. I don't know if you would like maybe to highlight some more of these actions that are helpful to this direction.
It's important. Okay, it's important to offer a safe space for women to share experiences and engage in peer-to-peer learning. Now, what is very close to my heart and is very relevant to what we've been discussing so far is that the Lean In initiative was founded by Sheryl Sandberg. She was the person who was next to Zuckerberg for a very long period of time as the chief operating officer of Facebook, and now it's called Meta. And she put her money where her mouth was by setting up the Lean In Foundation, which provides data-driven resources for these monthly circles of women to meet and follow, I put this in quote unquote, and follow this learning process, which is always based on solid research. So it's not an approach where we just sit there and have a group therapy session drinking wine. Mm-hmm. We do drink wine. And sometimes it could become a group therapy session, but mostly it's training and resources and numbers, which we use because it's important to understand that what women go through in Cyprus is quite similar to what's happening in other mm-hmm. parts of the Western world, for example. For us, it's important to understand that, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can seek out good practices. And we can see how advocacy is done, how lobbying is done, to bring forth some important issues that women professionals have to undergo through. And just, using numbers makes a very good point. I was invited to be a speaker the other day at a conference on research and inclusion and diversity and equality at the Frederick University in Cyprus. And it was a European program. And I was asked, what about implementing policies? And then I said, who is going to implement them? And the numbers, were very clear because in the Dean's Association board that we have in Cyprus, we have out of 8 members, 8 are men. And then if you look at CyNet, which is the network of all the research institutions, and it's the Cyprus Institute of Neurology, it's Karaiskakio Foundation, it's the universities, et cetera, you have a board, 6 members, 6 members are men. So if you have 8 men leading academia in Cyprus, 6 men leading the most important research network that we have. Okay, who is going to implement these policies? And I'm not saying that men cannot be champions for women, but we need to have our own voice and we need to have our own platform because we know much, much more what's going on in our daily lives. And of course, we are the experts actually to judge about the suitability of any kind of policies because they are tried and tested on us, but we're never there mm-hmm. to say anything we think about or to see how it's best for them to be implemented.
So you actually answered my other question. Where are the gaps and what are the
Sorry
barriers?
about that, stealing your lines.
But actually, this is very important because the lack of diversity in the decision-making bodies can have tremendous negative impact. And I think most of us have heard the example of the seat belt, right? That cars were designed based on male anatomy. And even when companies are required to do tests for women, basically it's a scaled down model of the male dummy. So having women on the table and discussing these topics will have brought this up earlier, right? And will have helped avoid accidents that were more dangerous to women than men.
Yeah, you see, Margarita, there's been for some time now, very recently, a lot of talk about menopause. Okay, we didn't talk about before. It was a taboo issue. And all the things that come with menopause and all the solutions which are not out there, the remedies to many of the problems faced by women during the perimenopause and the menopause period of their lives. And a friend of mine said, if it would have been a male issue, it would have been resolved. We are on this planet for, I would say, hundreds of years in civilized society, okay, where we're dealing with medicine progressing, with science progressing, and no one had dared to talk about the menopause. And it's only now that after we had some high-profile figures like Naomi Watts, for example, the famous actress, talking about this issue, that there's some kind of light being shed on what is going on. I mean, there's this other very ridiculous example that I heard in a speech a scientist gave, and she said there are more studies on tomatoes than there are studies on breast milk. I mean, if you think about it, it's a ridiculous analogy, but it shows to us that the priorities obviously were not set by women.
So this is actually highlighting very much the lack of data. Even if we wanted to take into account women's health issues, and we don't actually, as you said, I think the funding that goes to specifically women's health, like menopause, can be it's around 1% or something. It's very, very low compared to all the funding that goes to explore other diseases. So even if
I'm wondering how much is spent on Viagra and similar.
We'll expect more. And it's coming up, as you said now, because it's not the phase of menopause for a woman increases her risk for other diseases later on. So how you go through this phase is very important to reduce this risk. And if we don't research about it, we don't know. If we just, as you said, it's a taboo, just be patient and it will go away. And also we are now understanding from the area, of medicine that diseases affect very differently women. The drugs we have don't work equally well for men and women because they were tested in men. This was mainly because pregnancy and menstrual periods are more difficult to investigate.
But they are a reality. They are our reality.
But yes, unless if you test it, you won't know. Does it work in women or not? Are the side effects stronger or not? So this is definitely a huge data gap in the medicine area, but it's also a priority issue. This should be equal priority to all the other diseases that we're investigating.
We don't have any statistics on abortion in Cyprus. And again, why do we need to know that? We need to know that for all kinds of medical reasons, psychological support reasons, to understand how we should be treating perhaps our policies on sexual diseases and, so many things that come out of that. And we don't know because, again, it's a taboo issue. It has a religious twist. The clinics don't want to give the numbers. So again, it's really borders the ridiculous that we don't have those statistics to understand why women make this choice, if they need any help when making this choice, and how we could have prevented unwanted pregnancies in the first place. So Data is missing. And when it's missing, you cannot really have effective policies just on hearsay or what you assume the numbers to be.
So would you say that even if someone wanted to do data-driven policies in Cyprus, that this will be extremely hard because of the lack of existence of data and also the lack of access in such data?
Yes, and it's also the understanding that they don't separate the data, that concerns men and women. So if you don't have the correct numbers to begin with, or you've never put any effort into disaggregating the data you've got, then how exactly can you make assumptions and can you come to conclusions not only based on assumptions?
Mm-hmm. So this is we could call it a data fail that causes a policy fail, let's say, because you don't take into account the key parameters to actually do something that will help.
But there is also a problem, even when we have the data, we don't do anything about it. And I'll just give you an example. I mean, I think it's quite embarrassing, and I have the numbers here for 2023. Cyprus, on the indicator of the European Union Gender Equality Institute, EIE, which is the official institution working on gender equality in the EU, ranks Cyprus as 21st out of 27. We're number 21 out of 27. I mean, that's shocking, isn't it? It's well below the EU average. And when you check female presence where political decisions are made within the big indicator, when you disaggregate into smaller indicators, we are almost last. We're 26 out of 27. So is it important that women are in decision-making centers? Absolutely, because they have different priorities than those of men. And that we know because we know even in parliaments around the world, it makes a difference how many women you have in place, because this is where they legislate, and they legislate about things, social and health issues and educational issues and gender issues and so on and so forth. So if you have very few women in the legislature, very few women in the executive, non-existent women in the municipal councils, where decisions are being made about kindergarten schools run by the municipalities, for example, and you have no one there who is truly vested, sitting on a board which is doing policy in the private sector as well, or in academia, deciding on research priorities, and there are no women around. I mean, it's the men making the decision on behalf of everyone else in society.
So the barrier. This is the first barrier. Let's say that you're not part of the conversation, and it's half of the population, so it should be represented ideally at a sufficient. And I think the 30% was something that was proposed as you need. That's your minimum.
It's a critical mass.
It's
there are studies which have been done. Not everybody adheres to that, because some people say it should be 50-50. But we know that for any kind of change to sort of take any kind of momentum, you need at least 30% of those present in that team making the decision to be of that group which wants to bring change. So if you have one woman out of 10 members of the board, there's no way she can make a significant impact on policy making.
So unless if we tackle this, let's say, it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? Because they're not part of the conversation. Policies don't come in place that could help alleviate any, other barriers that stop women from participating. And we're kind of stuck, one will say.
There is a solution to that, though. There is one thing we could do and do it horizontally, and that is quotas. I know some women, even women in some cases, don't like quotas because they say, they're going to be saying about me, I am the diversity appointment, the diversity token. They need to tick the box, so they appoint a woman. But it doesn't work like that. First of all, we know that quotas help women close the confidence gap. In what sense? In that they are appointed in a position always, of course, the premise should be that they have the qualifications for a position. We're not just saying appoint a woman with no qualifications just because she's a woman. But it closes the confidence gap because it gives women the opportunity to learn and improve. And think about politics and the Cyprus problem. If there's never any woman in the negotiating team, how could we ever have any women experts? But if you say I have a gender equality quota policy and I start appointing women in positions where decisions are made, it's a training opportunity as well, because you will never have enough women to appoint unless you start with the quotas. And the quotas can be a temporary measure. At the same time, you create role models. Other younger women see these women in positions of power and say, oh, it's possible. I can get a chance. I can do this. I can be like that. You know what they say? You cannot covet what you cannot see. So you're creating role models with quotas. And on the other hand, it makes the men become accustomed to the presence of women. And this is like the short term and the medium term. Now, in the long term, we know from studies done. I think Harvard did like a very interesting 10-year study in South India on quotas in the municipal, very small municipal community councils. And they saw that it took 10 years, but gender stereotypes were molded differently because of quotas. Because at some point after 10 years, it takes 10 years, after 10 years, the men became they consider it normal for women to be in the municipal councils. And women again said, okay, yes, it's done. Other women are there and I can be there. I'm not going to be the only voice. So I feel self-conscious and I will not voice any concerns or put any priorities. Because if you're on your own in a council, in a board, in a company, and you're the only woman and all the other top people are men, will they ever allow you to voice what you want to say? Will it have an impact? And if you just step out and call something out for the first time and no one pays attention, and you do the second time and the third and fourth time and no one pays attention, nothing changes, then you just keep quiet. So quotas allow for safe spaces to be created, for platforms to be created where there can be a critical mass for women to say what they need to say and be part of the conversation, as you just said.
And I think this raises a very important, you mentioned that it took 10 years, right? And in policy making, usually things are fast. We want to put a policy now. If we're going to do any data analysis, it has to be fast. But actually, policies need to be put in place, monitored, evaluated, and then that can drive the decisions, right? And we don't need to do everything from scratch because other countries have done, and we can correct for any differences when we do our analysis and incorporate these best practices. And I think another very important thing you mentioned is that let's call it the muscle. I've heard it in a podcast. It's the muscle of inclusiveness. You have to exercise it, right? And sometimes women also don't have it. So by being included, it's also beneficial for men and women. You see also the benefits of the diverse teams, as we know, different disciplines, different sex, different ethnicities, all these bring in different perspectives and help us solve problems more efficiently, right? But how can we actually help the society we're part of exercise this?
It comes from the top. And I'll explain what I mean. If you have a chairman, it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman. And this chairperson gets to appoint women. Now we know there's going to be in 2026, all the big companies all over Europe will need to have, I think, 35%, if I'm not mistaken, women on boards. Okay. Yeah. If the CEO, the chairperson, or whoever doesn't only care to tick the box to be within the framework of the law, but is very much personally invested into creating inclusion, not just diversity. Okay, this person should be inviting the women to the party and allowing them to dance. And that's the difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity, as they say, you get invited to the party. Inclusion means that people will actually invite you to dance with them. And it comes from the top because the other directors or managers will copy what the behavior of the top person in a firm, in an organization, in a university, at a government body. They will emulate the way this person perceives equality. So you need leaders who are gender sensitive. There are special trainings for that, by the way, that they can do a gender sensitive or a gender responsive leadership. And you need to encourage these new people you bring on board to provide the perspectives. And data shows that when a team is diverse and inclusive, it provides much better outcomes in terms of quality. What they say, that if we all think alike, no one thinks much, because we all think the same, and we cannot come up with novel ideas to resolve long-standing problems. So, as a matter, in terms of decision making and data, the jury is not out. We know that these kind of diverse teams are much, much better in coming to better decisions, better outcomes than a monolithic board of directors, which is old men in gray suits, for example.
Right. So I guess you also mentioned the role model part. So by having some strategic policies, let's say, in place, which is the quota, which I know it's very much discussed and there are very strong opinions on it. But if it can achieve two things or three things at the same time, it might not be the perfect policy, but it can help. Like the role models that you mentioned, it's true. When we did last year our awareness campaign, women are very much underrepresented in mathematics and in science in general. And this is across Europe because we're part of the European network and we discuss with each other. We see this is not a unique problem in Cyprus, right? So we did an exhibition of women that are very successful in mathematics. It was their portraits, including things about their life, their work. And this went on in many universities and institutes in Cyprus. And the feedback we got back was like, wow, there's so many. I knew about Marie Curie.
Everyone knows.
I didn't know about this. And, it did make a dent, let's say. And it was also very nice to see students from high school level being actually very inspired, because I want to do math, but not many want to do so. But things like quota ensure that the student population and the younger population will see this more consistently, right? And also what you mentioned about confidence is very important, because you might not be included and not be in a safe space to ask to be included. And if I may mention, we had an event with the British Council a couple of years ago. A member of the royal family, was attending an event in Cyprus. And she said, I went to a meeting, it was only men. And I asked them, where are the women? And they said, there are not enough chairs. And she said, let's bring some chairs then. Because this was not an excuse. This was just, as you said, it's used to have men in boards. But what can we do to bring them in?
What can we do to bring them in? Okay, very, very good question. It has to be a policy which encourages the younger generation to start applying for positions. And the older generation, which I am part of, to encourage them. I think mentoring programs are important. I think the attitude of companies should start having like a charter about equality and diversity and solid policies which are actually implemented, because we're very good at throwing policies around and then nobody monitors. You mentioned monitoring before, and I want to comment on that. How do we monitor the success of a policy? Now, if I can mention KPMG, for example, with the Lean-In Circles, which is a monthly meeting of women, diverse group from different walks of life, and they're trying to sort of resolve professional problems or address the confidence gap, public speaking skills, for example, negotiation skills, and so on and so on. With KPMG, we did like an intra-company circle. So they mixed and matched from partners to junior members of the team, coming from different cities, and we would meet once a month in Nicosia. And this effort was true and true to itself, and it was very real because they were women partners who invested their time being part of the team, listening to the younger members of staff. Some of them, they're terrified. They're in the same group as a partner
right.
in one of the biggest accounting firms. But it was the attitude of the women who were involved and the fact that they really care to help these women to overcome obstacles, to train them, to mentor them, and to encourage them to create a pipeline. You need to create a pipeline. You cannot just suddenly find women and just put them on boards. You have to create the pipeline. And we have not been very good. We have not been very good in training women because we hire them, we train them, and then we let them go because the system fails them. They have children. We have the motherhood trap. We know that for every child you have, you basically miss 1.5 years out of your working life in terms of achievement, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas with the men, it's the opposite. They get the fatherhood bonus because companies prefer to hire men with kids and responsibilities because they think they will be more loyal to the company than someone who's not married, doesn't have any commitments and responsibilities. But they think women could be a burden to the company because they say, she's going to have kids, she's going to go on maternity leave, and then she comes back and then she goes again on maternity leave. When the kids are sick, who's going to stay home with them? Who's going to take them to the doctor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we need special projects to carry this through. And it's the same in academia. I mean, they say, we don't have enough women professors. And I'm just wondering, when an academic has a child, is she on the same par with a male academic with no responsibilities? Can she write as many research papers? Can she present? Can she travel? Can she do projects with other universities for some time? Is it easy for her to take a sabbatical? Or if she's been away on maternity leave, can she also take a sabbatical to write and research? So you see all these practical problems institutions need to resolve. And I think the Athena Swan program, it's a very good verification program for universities to be part of. I've always been like a big fan of it. Mm-hmm. Some people say it's not perfect. Done is better than perfect. So I'm glad that some of the institutions in Cyprus are looking into that. I'm very proud that I was part of that initiative along with some other very passionate women about this thing. And you said, will it change the world in one day? No, Rome wasn't built in a day. The world cannot change in a day, but you need to create a precedent. Mm-hmm. And every one of us, whether it's a lecturer or a researcher or a politician, because I was also the minister who was responsible for gender equality and human rights, and I did try to institute changes because, nothing beats executive power in bringing changes around. But if it all depends on who the minister is, and if the next minister doesn't think this is a priority and has other issues to deal with, it needs to be like a policy by the very top, and it should be horizontal, and gender mainstreaming should be taking place in all walks of life. But you cannot really do gender mainstreaming without gender budgeting. So if you say we're doing gender mainstream, but we have zero resources allocated to this, it will not happen.
Yes. And it's like you said, some initiatives are taken from different networks and NGOs, but if it doesn't come from the top, like for the academia, for example, the European Union has included this clause that, if you went on a maternity or a paternity leave, there's equal...
as it should be, yeah,
as it should
absolutely,
be.
Yes.
You take 1.5 years extra in terms of eligibility to apply for these very prestigious grants, the ERC. Some other societies, like the Neuroscience Society that I went recently, they have a kindergarten on spot for the conference because sometimes it's both parents that want to go. So you don't need to choose which one is going to at 10. You can just bring the kids with you and pick them up.
You see, I have a friend of mine. I used to teach her at some point. And she started where she did her PhD and started working at a very, very prestigious academic institution in the UK. And she's only there part-time. And I said, you can't really progress in your academic career. And we both understand what this means. You cannot be part-time and become, at some point, a professor just by being part-time all your life. And she was telling me that she chooses to be part-time because she also works for a very big news corporation, which is close by to her, to this university. I will not say any names. And she says, it's not the money. They have a creche. And I can leave my daughter there. It's in the same building that I work for this news corporation. And I cannot afford childcare otherwise. So I've never heard any man say, I will put my career on the back burner and I will be making choices based on childcare facilities. Mm-hmm. But it happens all the time with women. I've heard many stories. I'm sure you have as well. And we are part of those stories. We're part of those stories. So the takeaway from this podcast that I would like people to have is that gender equality doesn't exist. That's another myth which makes it extremely difficult when we try to do actions related to gender equality. Doesn't exist. Equality is not what I or you or I have experienced in the workplace, but it's what everyone should be experiencing. So it's equality for all. That's very important. Inclusion and diversity should be part of the package. And each one of us needs to make a conscious decision to fight for equality because it doesn't come as manna from heaven. Change is the direct result of conscious decisions. So we should all be conscious when we're making decisions in our daily lives. And when we can contribute anything in civil society or in our professional field, we should always be very conscious that we want to bring change. And even if it's a little thing that we can do, it still creates precedent. And accumulated precedent creates change.
I think this is very nice as a sum of really what we talked today and also at the event that we had back in June, that we definitely see that the disparities are there. Sometimes people don't recognize this is step one, acknowledge that there is this gap in order to actually make smaller, bigger, actions to solve it. And what can we do? For us coming from a data background, can we help collect better data? Can we use all these tools that we have, that we apply in research, and now we have the emerging AI technologies and so on? Can we use them to make better changes? And this is something that I know AI is, again, a big discussion because it can also promote discrimination, let's say. I don't know, would you like to?
Yeah, just one final word on that. Yes, because I many times I hear they say, technology will alleviate differences, and there will be algorithms choosing CVs and all the rest. The big question is, who is designing those algorithms? And surprise, surprise, is the men. If you take the 4 or 5 big tech companies in the world, which are engaged in those activities, the giants, only 10% of the people who are involved in that are women. So that's a shocking statistic, and again, it shows you that the reality we will be experiencing in a few years from now. I'm not saying decades, because the rate of growth is exponential. It will again be designed by the men. So it cannot be neutral, and it cannot be gender responsive necessarily, because the women, again, are not there and they're not designing the future. Yeah.
So we have a lot of work to do, that's for sure.
A lot of work.
But we can use what we have, and we can, the skills and the tools and the data to try and make better decisions. ideally. And I would like to thank you. This was a wonderful chat, as always.
Thank you, too, for the invitation.
And thank you all for listening. We will be back with more activities in the future, so stay tuned if you find this intersection of gender inequalities and data and policy interesting. Thank you.
I will certainly stay tuned.